Please wake up. I'm praying for you. Please wake up.
Poor Orphan used her life savings to save stranger unaware he's a billionaire. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Jessica Clement lived in a tiny freezing attic where she could barely stand upright. The landlord refused heating upstairs, so she slept in layered clothes and woke before sunrise every day. Beside her mattress sat a metal box of coins and a worn notebook where she recorded every cent. She skipped meals often, repeating to herself that survival today protected tomorrow. She worked as a cleaner at the luxurious Wellington Grand Hotel, moving silently through marble halls while wealthy guests slept. She watched their habits carefully, studying discipline instead of envying comfort. Head housekeeper Clara warned her that rich people never notice workers like her, but Jessica only nodded and kept working. At night she washed dishes in a diner, returned home exhausted, counted her savings again, and added a new line to her notebook. Her late mother had told her money mattered only when it saved a life, so she kept saving without knowing whose life it would be. The hotel basement smelled of detergent and warm metal pipes. Jessica started every shift there, collecting carts of fresh towels before sunrise. Other workers complained constantly, but she worked quietly and organized everything with precision, believing discipline was the only thing poverty could not steal. Clara watched her one morning and asked why she tried so hard for a job nobody respected. Jessica replied simply that effort was practice for a future she hadn't reached yet. Later she cleaned executive suites where guests left behind half-eaten meals worth more than her weekly pay. She never touched the food, only noted how some guests arranged documents carefully while others scattered them carelessly. She began recognizing patterns between order and confidence. Without realizing it, she was teaching herself how successful people behaved, copying their posture when she walked empty hallways. Before leaving, she sat alone in the locker room and wrote in her notebook again. She listed habits she learned that day: wake early, plan ahead, stay calm. To her it felt like building a life piece by piece even if no one else could see it yet. Near the elevator lobby Jessica noticed a leather wallet lying beside a chair. Inside was thick cash and an ID belonging to an impatient business guest known for shouting at staff. She brought it to the front desk, but before she could explain, the man accused her of stealing after seeing her holding it. Security surrounded her and guests stared while she stood frozen, gripping her cleaning gloves. Clara defended her and cameras were checked. The footage showed the wallet falling from his pocket before Jessica picked it up. The man muttered an apology without meeting her eyes and walked away with his money. Jessica simply returned to work, but her hands shook slightly as she wiped the glass doors. That night she wrote only one sentence in her notebook: honesty may hurt today but protects tomorrow. Then she placed another coin into the metal box and closed it carefully. Outside the hotel in trance a young violinist played every evening under the street lamp. His name was Oliver Grant, and unlike most passers-by, Jessica never hurried past him. She paused briefly each night, listening before continuing to her second job. One cold evening he stopped mid-song and offered her a small smile, asking why she always listened but never stayed. She answered she couldn't afford to enjoy things for long. They began speaking in short conversations between her shifts. Oliver shared that music was the only thing keeping him hopeful after losing his scholarship due to unpaid fees. Jessica admitted she didn't have dreams anymore, only responsibilities to the future she was saving for. He disagreed, saying someone who keeps saving despite exhaustion clearly still believes in tomorrow. Before she left, Oliver played a softer melody just for her. She didn't clap or praise, only nodded and said it felt warm. That night in her notebook she added a rare second sentence: sometimes kindness is simply stopping long enough to hear someone. One afternoon Jessica cleaned a luxury suite earlier than scheduled and accidentally overheard a wealthy couple arguing in the adjoining dining room. Their voices were sharp, not loud but cutting, discussing inheritance, contracts, and trust. The woman accused the man of staying only for money, while the man insisted love had disappeared long ago. Jessica froze beside the doorway, realizing the expensive surroundings held tension heavier than poverty. She slipped out quietly, unsettled. Until then she had imagined wealth removed suffering, but their polished shoes and tailored clothes hid bitterness she recognized from poorer neighborhoods. While wiping mirrors afterward, she stared at her reflection and wondered whether stability truly came from money or from peace inside a person. That night she told Oliver briefly what she heard. He laughed softly and said people chase comfort thinking it brings happiness, but comfort only magnifies who they already are. Jessica didn't answer, but in her notebook she wrote that evening, "Wealth cannot fix a broken heart, only reveal it." After a late banquet cleanup, Jessica accidentally got locked inside the grand ballroom where maintenance shut the service doors early. The chandeliers were dimmed and the enormous hall stood silent, tables dressed in white cloth and untouched desserts arranged perfectly. For the first time she walked through the center instead of along the walls, her footsteps echoing across marble she usually crossed quickly while working. She sat at a guest table and carefully straightened the silverware, imagining what it felt like to belong somewhere without fear of being removed. The quiet wasn't painful like her attic. It was calm. She opened her notebook and wrote longer than usual, promising herself she would never become bitter no matter how hard life stayed. When morning staff unlocked the doors, they found her asleep sitting upright in a chair. Embarrassed, she apologized repeatedly, but Clara only handed her coffee and told her not to lose the determination she carried. Jessica nodded and returned to work, feeling strangely steadier than before. Across the city, David Williams ended another long meeting in a glass-walled office overlooking traffic far below. Employees respected his calm decisions, yet lately his attention drifted. His fiancée Janet called repeatedly during work hours, questioning schedules and finances with growing impatience. David answered gently but ended each call quieter than before. His assistant Marcus noticed the change and suggested a short vacation, but David refused, saying responsibilities couldn't pause. That evening he arrived home to find Janet planning renovations he never approved. She spoke quickly about merging accounts after marriage and simplifying legal protections he had placed around his company. David listened carefully and responded cautiously, explaining trust required time. Her smile tightened though her voice remained sweet. Later Marcus privately warned him her behavior felt rushed. David dismissed suspicion, believing misunderstandings could be solved calmly. Still, as he reviewed documents that night, he began organizing personal records more carefully than usual, an instinct he couldn't explain. Janet left the house the next afternoon claiming she had a spa appointment, but instead met Kennedy at a quiet cafe across town. They chose a corner table where no one paid attention. Kennedy grew impatient, asking how long they would wait while David kept control of his finances. Janet assured him she was close to solving everything and that soon nothing would be tied to David anymore. They spoke in lowered voices about legal delays and David's cautious habits. Kennedy worried David trusted his assistant too much, but Janet smiled confidently, saying she knew exactly how to make him stop questioning her. Her calmness made the plan feel already decided rather than imagined. Before leaving, she checked a small vial hidden inside her purse and slid it back into place. Kennedy watched nervously while she reassured him everything would happen soon and cleanly. As she walked away, her expression softened back into affection, ready to return home as if nothing had been discussed. Janet prepared a private dinner at home, arranging candles and soft music exactly the way David once said he liked after stressful weeks. She greeted him warmly at the door, apologizing for recent arguments and insisting they needed a peaceful evening together. David relaxed slightly, believing the tension between them might finally ease. While he reviewed messages on his phone, Janet moved through the kitchen carefully, pouring wine and setting plates with steady hands. Hidden inside her sleeve was the small vial she had carried earlier. She waited for the moment his attention drifted before adding it quietly to his drink, then returned to the table with a gentle smile. They spoke about ordinary things, travel ideas, work schedules, future plans, until David paused mid-sentence. His grip tightened around the glass as dizziness spread. Janet watched calmly as confusion replaced comfort on his face, the candles flickering between them while silence slowly filled the room. David tried to stand, but his legs weakened, forcing him back into the chair. The room blurred around the candlelight and he looked at Janet, confusion turning to fear. Instead of helping, she leaned back calmly and told him there was no point calling anyone. Her voice stayed gentle as she explained the drink was poisoned and help would never arrive in time. She wanted him to understand before the end. His breathing grew uneven while she continued speaking, revealing she and Kennedy were tired of waiting for control over his wealth. She described how carefully she planned everything so it would look natural. David's hand slowly reached toward his phone on the table, unnoticed as she talked, recording every word she spoke with quiet precision. Gathering the last strength he had, David pushed away from the table and staggered toward the door. Janet followed only to watch, amused, certain he could not survive long enough to reach anyone. He grabbed his car keys and left the house while she laughed softly behind him, convinced minutes were all he had left. David's vision doubled as he drove, streetlights stretching into long lines across the windshield. His hands trembled on the steering wheel and breathing burned in his chest. He realized he would not make it far and pulled the car roughly to the roadside before losing control. The engine stayed running while he stumbled out, collapsing beside the vehicle as strength drained from his body. Jessica was walking home from a long shift, shoulders heavy and feet sore, when she noticed the parked car and a man on the ground nearby. She slowed, unsure whether to pass or help, remembering how trouble often followed involvement. Then her mother's words echoed in her mind about helping even when it cost something. She hurried over and saw his fading consciousness. Her hands shook as she called emergency services, giving the location while keeping him awake as best she could. When the ambulance arrived, she rode with him, answering questions she barely understood. At the hospital desk, the deposit amount froze her, but after a brief pause she opened her bag, took out her entire savings, and paid without asking his name. Doctors rushed David into treatment while Jessica waited in the hard plastic chair outside the emergency room. Hours passed with only distant footsteps and muffled equipment sounds for company. A nurse finally approached and explained the poisoning was severe but treatable because he arrived just in time. Relief loosened Jessica's shoulders even though exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes. Dr. Austin later asked if she was family. She shook her head and admitted she didn't even know his name, only that she found him collapsing on the roadside. The doctor studied her worn uniform and gently told her the deposit she paid covered critical procedures. She nodded without regret, saying money mattered less than a life continuing. Instead of leaving, she stayed through the night watching the hallway door, unsure why she felt responsible for a stranger. When morning light entered through the windows, she quietly bought cheap coffee and returned to the same chair, waiting for news of someone whose story she had suddenly become part of. Late afternoon, Dr. Austin approached again and told her the patient had regained consciousness. Jessica hesitated outside the room, suddenly aware she had never even seen his face clearly before. Inside, David lay weak but alert, confusion fading as the doctor explained he had been brought in by a young woman who paid his emergency fees. David turned toward Jessica, surprised at the simplicity of the person who had saved him. He thanked her repeatedly, voice rough but sincere. She shrugged lightly and said anyone would have done the same, though they both knew that wasn't true. He asked why she stayed and she answered she only wanted to know he would live after spending everything she had. The honesty silenced him more than gratitude could. Before leaving for work she told him to focus on recovery instead of repayment. David watched her walk away, still unaware she had no idea who he was. For the first time in years, appreciation felt heavier than business responsibilities, and he realized a stranger had protected his life without asking his name. Jessica returned after work the next day carrying a small paper bag of fruit she could barely afford now that her savings were gone. She placed it beside his bed awkwardly, insisting hospital food looked depressing. David smiled faintly and asked about her life instead of speaking about himself. She described cleaning halls, washing dishes, and learning discipline from observing people who never noticed her. He chose not to reveal his identity, wanting their conversations free from expectation. They spoke about ordinary things, favorite weather, music from the street violinist, and how routines shape a person's future. For the first time in a long while David laughed without calculating consequences, and Jessica relaxed without fearing judgment. When visiting hours ended she stood to leave, reminding him recovery mattered more than pride. After she left, David replayed the recorded confession on his phone, his expression hardening. Gratitude warmed him, but justice now had direction, because he had survived long enough to hear truth spoken aloud. 2 days later David felt strong enough to walk slowly along the hospital corridor. Marcus arrived after finally locating him through hospital records, shocked but relieved to see him alive. David explained everything quietly and played the recorded confession. Marcus listened in disbelief, then immediately began contacting legal authorities while keeping David's survival confidential. Jessica arrived during the discussion and paused at the doorway, unsure if she should interrupt. David gently introduced Marcus only as a friend handling personal matters. She sensed seriousness but didn't question it, focusing instead on whether he was regaining strength. Her concern remained simple and direct, untouched by the complicated situation forming around him. After she left, Marcus assured David the evidence was clear and arrangements would be prepared carefully. David stared at the recording once more, realizing survival meant responsibility now. The attempt on his life was no longer just betrayal, it was something that needed to end properly before anyone else was harmed. Authorities arrived quietly that evening and spoke with David privately, documenting his statement while securing the recorded confession. They planned the arrest carefully to prevent interference. David remained calm, signing forms with steady hands, feeling closure approaching rather than anger. The truth was finally no longer only his burden to carry. The following day Janet was taken into custody without warning. Kennedy attempted denial until the recording was played, leaving silence heavier than protest. News had not yet reached the public, keeping the matter controlled while investigations continued. Marcus confirmed everything was handled, allowing David to focus on recovery instead of retaliation. Jessica visited later, noticing his expression calmer than before. He thanked her again, this time with deeper meaning she couldn't fully understand. She replied she was only glad he would return to his normal life soon, unaware how different that life truly was from anything she imagined. David was discharged a few days later and waited outside the hospital entrance for Jessica after her shift ended. When she stepped out and saw the car and driver beside him, she hesitated, sensing something unfamiliar. He explained quietly that there was more about him she had not known and invited her to sit before reacting. During the drive the city scenery changed from crowded streets to quiet avenues lined with guarded houses. Jessica realized the scale of his world long before he spoke. Finally he admitted he owned the company she had often heard mentioned in news reports and that his life was far larger than the simple image she knew. She sat silent, processing the distance between them. At the gate of his home she stepped back instead of entering, feeling misplaced. She said she helped a stranger, not a powerful man, and needed time to understand why he hid it. David didn't stop her when she left, recognizing trust could not be rushed even with gratitude between them. Jessica returned to her attic room feeling it smaller than ever, not because it changed but because her thoughts had. She replayed every conversation with David, realizing how naturally she spoke to him before knowing who he was. Now each memory felt uncertain, as if honesty had quietly shifted into distance. She avoided the hotel lobby the next morning, choosing service corridors to keep her mind steady. Oliver noticed her distraction when she passed his usual street corner. She explained briefly without details, saying the person she helped belonged to a world she couldn't enter. Oliver answered that kindness doesn't change meaning based on wealth and reminded her she never asked him for anything in return. His words settled her thoughts, though confusion still lingered. Later that evening she found a simple envelope slipped under her door containing a short note from David thanking her again and promising no expectations, only appreciation. There was no money inside, only sincerity. She placed it inside her notebook and realized what troubled her wasn't his wealth but the fear that their honesty might disappear behind it. Days passed without interruption until David appeared outside the diner where Jessica worked nights. He wore ordinary clothes and came alone, ordering the simplest meal and waiting until her break. She approached cautiously, unsure whether the conversation would feel the same. He spoke first, saying he came without drivers, offices, or plans, only to continue the conversations they started before she knew his name carried weight. He explained he hid his identity in the hospital because gratitude felt pure only when unconnected to status. The moment she learned the truth, distance appeared, and he didn't want kindness replaced by formality. Jessica listened quietly, realizing he had protected something fragile between them rather than deceiving her for advantage. When her shift ended they walked slowly along the street where Oliver played music nearby. Nothing grand was promised, only honesty and time. For the first time since learning the truth she laughed naturally again, understanding his world might be large, but the person she met had never changed. Weeks later David returned to the same roadside where his life had nearly ended and asked Jessica to meet him there after work. Evening lights reflected off passing cars while the air stayed calm. He told her surviving that night rearranged everything he valued, and the person who stayed beside him without reason became part of that change. Instead of dramatic gestures, he simply asked whether she would walk forward with him, whatever the future looked like. Jessica looked at the quiet road and remembered counting coins in her cold attic, never expecting the savings meant for an unknown life would shape her own. She said she didn't belong to wealth but she believed in sincerity, and if that remained true she would not run from it. Her answer carried steadiness rather than excitement, exactly what he hoped for. Time passed gently after that. She moved from survival to stability. He learned peace beyond achievement, and their lives settled into partnership built from a single unplanned decision to help a stranger. The beginning was not grand, only honest, and that honesty remained the reason they chose each other every day. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.